Yeah, absolutely. So let's welcome Todd Gratz, Director, RPA Drone Program at BNSF Railway. Todd, good morning. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Good morning to both of you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you as well, Todd, and got a really interesting topic today because we're kind of combining all things that AUVSI does, right? Talking about the infrastructure inspection community and your guys' role with BNSF. First things first, give us a little bit of background about yourself, what you do with BNSF, and how that works into drone technology.
Yeah, so I've been with BNSF for over 13 years, and through that had the honor of co-founding our drone program back in 2013. And that led to all my involvement in a wide range of industries that are leveraging RPA systems, uncrewed aircraft, and related automated systems for infrastructure inspection. And it's not just on the surface, obviously, it's in the air, it's maritime. When you look at the larger spectrum of everything that we're doing within the AUVSI community, especially, it's multimodal, multifunction, multi-sensor, all making sense of what's happening with infrastructure and with operations, transportation, what have you. So it's been an exciting run for the last few years as we've watched the industry mature.
It really has, and it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what all the use cases they come out to be, what comes into reality with all the tests, et cetera, that are going on. There's some argument there as to how widespread, that type of stuff. How did BNSF, a railroad, get into drones? Why drone? You mean you're not going to deliver rail cars of freight with a drone, right?
Yeah, and obviously I could speak specifically on BNSF, but probably better. All of the railroads are always looking for new ways of doing things and how to add to their inspection quality or expand frequency and so on and so forth. And so back really in 2015, when the FAA was looking for a research partner for critical infrastructure inspection, they chose BNSF, but many other linear asset operators at the same time were wanting to do the same thing. And the core focus is how do you expand your presence around those assets without adding to risk? So again, whether it's power lines, pipelines, or rails, it is focused on additive inspections, higher frequency, higher resolution, all the related things you can imagine, without having to send more and more humans into close proximity of that infrastructure. When you look at the critical infrastructure operators of this country, which there are many, they are pathologically focused on operational quality and risk reduction. And if they can send various types of robots in to assist the humans with that effort, then it's a win-win. You get more inspection, plus obviously you can be far more caring of that infrastructure. And when you zoom out away even from the critical infrastructure operators, most everyone looking at this technology is in one way, shape, or form looking to do the same.
So Todd, I think about this all the time when I'm traveling, when I'm flying. I'm a window seat flyer, so I'm always looking down at the ground thinking about, you see millions of miles of rails and of roads crisscrossing the whole country, and you've got to think that there are places that aren't safe, and there are places where the infrastructure is falling into disrepair that humans can't get to because it just takes too long. A human can't walk every single inch of a rail track crossing from Texas up to Montana and find all of those problem spaces. So let's talk a little bit about why drones are so crucial in this aspect, not only from getting close into the proximity of those places that are dangerous for people, but of the ease of inspecting every single inch of the system and finding those things that would otherwise be missed because you simply just don't have the workforce to do it.
Well, that's a great example, and you picked an area that I know all too well. I would say not all of it, but a great majority of the infrastructure we have between Texas and Montana, I have been in close proximity to. It's quite a ways. I think the single problem that you look at for all critical infrastructure opportunities is the hard to access areas. So it's not necessarily a distance situation. In the case of using BNSF as an example, we have drones that are capable of flying hundreds of miles at a time. We're one of the few operators that can do that. But we also have many, many other drones that fly in shorter distances. So distance helps, but access to difficult to access areas is what really makes a difference for all the infrastructure operators. And if you look at what happened in parts of Northern California or the very rural parts of the West, it's extremely difficult on a highly frequent basis to get humans and equipment out there to inspect that equipment when a drone could fly at a much higher rate of speed, sometimes direct, over the infrastructure and get there on a more frequent basis. So it's more about getting into the difficult areas, not as much the rural or the lengthy areas, but the difficult to access areas. But then while you're there, you somehow got there, especially with the longer range drones and related robotic systems. So why not look at everything along the way? So then it becomes a much more inclusive way of adding inspection frequency into these difficult to access areas. And you'd be surprised, it isn't always the middle of nowhere areas that are difficult to get to. Think about the underside of bridges or overpasses over interstates and some of these other areas that are just difficult to access no matter where they're at.
So Todd, let's talk a little bit about the human capital and the specialized human labor that it takes to operate these kind of things, and if there's any hurdles when it comes to sourcing that type of labor, and if there's also any hurdles when it comes to the technology needed to make these inspections a reality. Are you guys using specialized drones for this kind of stuff, or is it just kind of standard robotics, or is there now this niche to be filled for things like this?
Well, most of the critical infrastructure operators in the country have a pretty similar set of aircraft requirements. But one thing that that has made it difficult is diversity of supply. Right, you primarily have two major top tier vendors that you can source aircraft from. That's of course DJI and then Skydio, and then you have a sea of other up and coming technology providers, more of which are being actually created here in the United States, which is very helpful for our infrastructure operators. So aside from just sourcing of supply and sensors, you know, you mentioned the specialized operators. Some time ago, that was a problem because of the difficulty in securing a private pilot license. But since Part 107 and since the FAA and AUVSI and others have been so forward leaning into making that credential attainable, testing centers widely available, you know, the materials to understand and be prepared for the test widely available, it's become much easier to get that standard line of sight Part 107 pilot into your operation, whether that's as an employee or a contract. You know, my employer, we have over 200 employee pilots, and we've run them through that Part 107 program, which was before, you know, required a private pilot license. The next credential, which of course will be a big hurdle, and it's still to be determined, but I'm on the advisory and rulemaking committee that is very close to finishing our work, submitting our report, and I'm sure the FAA will talk more. But that will be the credentials and the skill sets necessary to operate the longer range or even shorter range beyond visual line of sight aircraft. That'll be the next hurdle. But I think as designed, it will be attainable, it'll be available, and it'll be an entirely new skill set that some of our more credentialed pilots that may fly for airlines or other more specialized users will find an entirely new career pathway that they may enjoy even more. And that's, you know, operating one or more of these aircraft at any given time. So there's some pretty exciting futures ahead for, you know, for the availability of pilots and you know, the job creation that represents.
So with that future availability, public-private partnership is obviously super important when it comes to stuff like this. Are there funds blocked out in the infrastructure bill, or is there public-private partnership in the works with government agencies to fund some of this technology development and fund some of these developments? Because obviously it's really, really crucial when it comes to keeping the infrastructure safe, and it honestly kind of helps the government a little bit more make smarter decisions if they can fund into the process of seeing what needs to be fixed.
Yeah, certainly. So the interesting thing is, even before the infrastructure bill, companies had to fund this internally. So you can be thankful that long before there was federal spending in this space, there was private capital put to work for years, right? I mean, you started seeing the advent of that private capital enter the marketplace in 2012, 2013. You know, the likes of 3D Robotics and DJI and others. But fast forward to where we're at today, there are some dollars available in these federal programs, but the real power is coming from is at the state level, at the municipal level, and then within private capital, and that's happening within, you know, certain counties and states that have decided that they want to inspect more of the public infrastructure with drones. They reach out to private companies that have them. That's where a lot of the goodness is happening. separate, and I'm not taking anything away from the infrastructure bill, but separate from that, more of the opportunity has been away from the federal level, and it's been out in the states and municipalities that are working with all the various drone operators. Then you have, of course, the national players that are not necessarily looking at an infrastructure inspection, but are looking at things like package delivery and other things. And so you take Wing, for example, who's working with private developers, with municipalities, and with a state to bring that service to fruition. So that's happening, but in many cases away from the federal level. Now, the federal level will develop and benefit further from all that activity happening as well.
Yeah, it kind of feeds up. Excellent stuff, Todd. Really appreciate you coming on the show today. You have a wonderful rest of your day, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you, Todd. Thanks.